Now with Steve Marius and Ugo Amaldi, as ISR was a transformational machine, changing the paradigm in particle physics. Don't worry, Lini will come. And after that, he is paving the way for the next machines, SPS and LHC. It's my great pleasure to introduce Lynn Evans, who play an important role transforming the SPS in a collider mode and being the LHC project leader for long years and bringing the LHC to commissioning. Then, Lynn, you have the challenge to speak about these two machines in only 20 minutes. Do in 18 minutes would be very nice. Okay, do it.
Okay, well, I think I would be foolish to even try to cover both machines in 18 minutes. What I will do is to tell you the last 50 years as I've lived it. I actually came to CERN the first time in 1968, and then to stay in 1969. And what did I see when I came here? I saw bulldozers everywhere, bulldozers, finishing the ISR. There was the Tortella wooden barrack restaurant, the workers' restaurant where all the CERN staff used to go to eat. And above all, there were bulldozers building a wall of steel between the PS and the Gargamel hall. And how do I go up and down with this? Yeah. So this wall of steel was, of course, the muon shielding for Gargamel. It was whispered to me that it was the Swiss Strategic Steel Reserve, and this is part of it here. I think it's still there. I can't remember them asking for it back. So anyway, steel is 5 times cheaper than beer per kilo, so they're not very interested. So this was the startup of Gargamel, which was so important. I also saw the first neutrino horn. This is the inner conductor of the neutrino horn, and who else but Simon van der Meer invented it and opened up basically the field of neutrino physics with bubble chambers as essential for the operation of Gargamel. In January 1970, this gentleman visited CERN and told us about his interpretation of the deep inelastic scattering experiments going on at the Linac SLAC, and his interpretation as partons. And as Hugo just said, I think Gargamel actually played an important role in showing that these partons really are quarks. What else happened in 1970? Well, first of all, Gargamel started taking data. And that was a little bit James Bond-like, because my office, which I shared with 8 other people, was overlooking the Gargamel hall. And when it was operating, the whole area was cordoned off, and there were 2 fire engines standing there, waiting for any incident, which fortunately never happened. 1970, I think I'm wrong there. I think the first beam into the ISR was at the beginning of 1971. But ISR commissioning started. And although I was not involved, I had friends that were involved. And the ISR very quickly reached a brick wall. And it stayed at that brick wall for some months, where the young guns of the ISR were desperately trying to praise the keys of the sextuple power supplies out of the bosses, who didn't believe that they would do any good. But as soon as they got them, they knew exactly what to do, reverse the sign of the chromaticity, and the intensity went up right away. February 1971, the SPS was approved. And I don't expect you to read this. This was the press release. And in fact, you will see that the cost of the SPS would be 1.15 billion Swiss francs, which, if you inflate it to today's price, is quite close to the cost of the LHC. And the cost per JEV of the LHC is about 500 times less than the SPS. So it was approved for 300 GeV operation. During the construction, the energy was increased to 400 GeV, and it even gone up to 450 GeV. In 1972, yet again, that man, Simon, published this paper. And by the end of 1971, both Simon and I had moved into the new 300 GeV project. Simon was working on building the main power supply of the SPS. It shows how incredibly versatile he was. And he published this gem of a note. It's only 5 pages long, where he, and very easy to understand if you want to look at it, where he produced his estimate of stochastic damping, as he called it, of beta-tone oscillations in the ISR. And in this, the end of this is very interesting. Final note, this work was done in 1968. The idea seemed too far-fetched at the time to justify publication. However, the fluctuations upon which the system is based were experimentally observed recently. And those fluctuations are the Schottky noise that Steve referred to. Although it may still be unlikely that useful damping could be achieved in practice, it seems useful now to present at least some quantitative estimate of the effect. And it might have stopped there, except that Wolfgang Schnell took up the challenge and built, as was said, a cooling system where, using the means of the time, the bandwidth of the power amplifiers available, etc., and the ISR was not at all foreseen. The lattice was not foreseen for optimized for that sort of thing. But nevertheless, they showed that stochastic cooling was really going on. The time scale is very long, hours. But you see the cooling of the vertical beam size and the heating as the cooling is switched off. So I don't think this was of any operational importance, but it was absolutely an essential demonstration. Then in 1973, as Carlo mentioned, was the discovery of weak neutral currents in Gargamel, so the most important result to come out of Gargamel. The significance there, of course, was that neutral currents were predicted by the electroweak theory of Weinberg, Salam, and Glashow, which also predicted the existence of 2 vector bosons, one charged and one neutral, with an estimate of their mass, a ballpark estimate. I think it was between 50 and 100 GeV, something like that, of their mass. And a mass which could not be accessed by any existing machine. The SPS at 400 GeV has got a center of mass energy of about 30 GeV, so in fixed target mode. So that could not be used for the W and Z. But then in 1975-76, Carlo brought it all together. He had the estimate of the W and Z mass. He knew what energy was needed. We had the SPS being commissioned, and Carlo realized that if we could convert the SPS into a colliding beam machine, but it's only a single ring, so it's got to be protons, antiprotons, and the means of producing the antiprotons, they can be produced in the PS, but they would have to be accumulated and cooled in a special ring. And he had also the stochastic cooling to do that. So these 3 things came together with the proposal of converting the SPS into the proton-antiproton collider. In 1977, there was the switch on of the SPS, the inauguration of the SPS. And I remember I was there, and there was one young scientist invited as a guest speaker. He's not changed very much, apart from the color of his hair. So you see the young Chris with Wertenrichter. So then things went very quickly. I think there was first of all, the dedicated ring that was built, the initial cooling experiment, ICE, which was built from the G-2 magnets, from the first G-2 experiment at CERN. And this was adapted for stochastic cooling. The real importance of this ring was, it was cooling protons, of course, not antiprotons. But the real importance was that the theory of stochastic cooling was refined to a high degree by Frank Sakara, Harry Wood, and Simon himself. And the filter method of cooling, of fast momentum cooling, by Lars Tondal was developed, and I think you've already seen a picture like this of the fast cooling, not in hours now, but in a few minutes, of the momentum spread of the beam in ice. And it got to be much faster when it came to building the AA. Okay, the next step was building the antiproton accumulator. So the antiprotons were produced from a 26 GeV beam in the PS. The peak in the production of antiprotons is about 3.5 GeV. So the accumulator was built for 3.5 GeV, injection, stacking and cooling of a beam. It would take about 20 hours to produce a stack that was sufficiently dense to be able to transfer over to the SPS, accelerate. The SPS in CW mode, limited by the cooling power, was about 270 GeV, went up to 315, I think, in the second phase, and so in the SPS. But a problem there was the antiprotons were at 3.5 GeV, and you have to get them up to 270 GeV in the SPS. And the SPS has got a transition energy at about 23 GeV, where very nasty things go on, especially with the very high bunch current that we had, an order of magnitude higher than with the normal fixed target program. So this certainly was going to be a problem, and there was a little fight with Simon, which for once he lost, in that we knew we were obliged to inject through the PS and accelerate the beams up to an energy of above the transition of the SPS, so 26 GeV in the PS to inject into the SPS. But getting that energy, we needed to upgrade the beamline, and that would take quite a time. So in order to make progress and show that we could store these very intense beams, we did a trick which was quite revolutionary at the time. This is the... Sorry, Carlo, I showed an important transparency. Where is my pointer gone? Okay, it's gone. So this is the tune of the SPS, going up between 12 and 30. And it's a very peculiar lattice in the SPS. Because of six-fold symmetry, you see that this is the dispersion function, and the transition energy. The transition energy in a proton machine is a rule of thumb that gamma transition is equal to Q. So in the SPS, we had to reduce the transition energy from 23 down to something like 13 in order to inject beams with the existing equipment above transition and to make progress. So we actually dropped. And you see this discontinuity in multiples of 6 because of the six-fold symmetry. And you see that in the dispersion function, there are minima. So what we did was we moved the tune down from 27 down to 15. And then that allowed us to eject above transition, and then that allowed us to show that we could really store these very intense beams. Although that was not used in the final thing, we upgraded the beamline. But that's where we made progress. We had a lot of other things to do in the SPS, like two low beat insertions, a beamline for the anti-protons, upgrading the proton beamline, and dealing with the problems of storage, because these beams, not like the ISR, these beams were bunched. And that means that the RF was on all the time, and there were tremendous problems with RF noise. Took us about 6 months to fix. Anyway, in the end, it all worked, and the first beam, I love this transparency. It's not mine, it's Carlo's. In the end, we were ready to bring the first beams of proton with antiproton into collision. But before we did that, our friends in SLAC tried to cheer us up, and they did an experiment where they took the energy of spear down, so there was no synchrotron radiation damping anymore. Like in this machine, there is no damping. And they showed us that it would never work. So when we switched on the PP-bar collider for the first time, there was not a control room full of people. There was just Carlo and myself with the operations crew in the middle of the night in the SPS control room. And I believe it was Sergio Citlin in the UA1 control room. Is that right? Yeah. And we brought these beams into collision, and it worked perfectly. I went home to bed around 6 in the morning, and Carlo went to the airport and got on a flight to Lisbon, where he showed this transparency at the Lisbon conference. And that was the start of the wonderful experience with the PP-bar. PP-bar was really the test bed for the LHC. I think in the collider we probed the parameter space so that we could really design the LHC with confidence, especially for the magnitude of the beam-beam tune shift. The problems of RF noise we now understood, and intra-beam scattering was another thing. It looks like I'm running out of time. And I've not even got to the LHC yet. So in 1984, I think this is a recognized kind of kickoff time for the LHC, where there was a meeting of machine builders and experimentalists in Lausanne, and there was a consensus that this was to be the next machine. Although it took another 10 years to get it approved, and Chris will deal with that. There was also the small problem of the SSC, and I think Carlo did a fantastic job in keeping the LHC dream alive, even when the SSC construction had started. So I'm going to finish off. I'm not going to even say anything about the LHC. I think it speaks for itself. The LHC is a fantastic machine. It's using very innovative technology of pressurized superfluid helium and all the rest. The road has been a long and sometimes a very bumpy one. I think it took some 18 years between the approval of LHC and the discovery of the Higgs boson. So it's been a pretty hard one, but we got there in the end. So in these 18 minutes, I hope that I've taken you through from the invention of the neutrino horn that led to the discovery of weak neutral currents, to the stochastic cooling. The ISR was an essential part, obviously, to the vision of Carlo in the proton-antiproton collider, and his efforts in keeping LHC alive. Simon is unfortunately no longer with us, but I think that we should all be eternally grateful to Carlo for taking us on this incredible journey of almost 50 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for this very inspiring talk and remembering all these things. One quick question to Lynn. I think we will hear more about LHC by Chris after the break. If not the case, I'll give the floor. Thank you again,
Okay.
Lynn, and give the floor